myself in an odd position of tensions when the Thanksgiving holiday rolls around. On one hand, I'm excited about getting together with family or friends, which this past week included, among other things, a tofurkey roast. I enjoy the holiday as a time of family, a time of gratitude, a time of connecting with one another. But on the other hand, I found myself irritated when complete strangers wished me well for the holiday. Like when a drugstore clerk automatically wished me a happy Thanksgiving. I wanted to say, what makes you think I celebrate Thanksgiving anyway? I'm not quite sure where this reaction comes from. It might be a bit of the San Francisco Bay Area mentality that has seeped into me, which I do get teased about a good bit by some folks. In San Francisco, there are alternate views of many traditional holidays, including an insistence on calling Columbus Day Indigenous Peoples Day instead. Okay, actually, I think that's a good switch. Now, alternate words to the farmer in the dell, well, that's a different story. But I also think back to the origins of the Thanksgiving holiday, especially when I see the stereotypical cartoons of the happy pilgrim standing next to the happy Indian and a smiling turkey alongside them. I really don't think the bird would be smiling. So unlike what I learned in elementary school, how Thanksgiving was a celebration when the Indians and the pilgrims sat down together and shared food, the holiday was originally far different. The first Thanksgiving, I believe, was declared in 1637 by the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony in celebration of a massacre of 700 Pequot women, men, and children. Not exactly a Thanksgiving that I get excited about. So this tension and mix of feelings found me not with my family early Thanksgiving morning a few years ago, but on a boat headed towards Alcatraz Island. Bundled up against the cold, I joined 4,000 other people, both those of indigenous descent and allies, for an annual Thanksgiving Day pilgrimage to the island. In the late 1960s, there was a new law declaring that Native Americans could reclaim federal land that had been taken from them if it was no longer in use. So tribes across the country united and acted on that law in 1969 to take over Alcatraz Island, which had been vacant since 1963 when the last prisoner left. So it was technically unused at the time. The activists managed to hold onto the island for nearly 2 years before being evicted, with allies on boats speeding around the blockades to bring them supplies. To commemorate this history, 1 day per year, Thanksgiving Day, the usual tours of the island and the prison are suspended, and a sunrise celebration is held there instead. That morning, under a clear sky, we got off the ferry and wound our way through the prison complex. I anticipated we would see a glorious sunrise in the clear sky that day. The celebration took place in an enormous circle, 20 people deep, around a bonfire, set under Alcatraz's central tower. There was drumming and dancing, prayers and singing, both in English and in a variety of indigenous languages, which I loved that they didn't all the time bother to translate them. It was beautiful. I was swept away with it, calling the O of applause along with everyone else. The music moved through different types and different groups of dancers from different tribes. They danced by themselves or along with others, with various speakers mixed in. The moments were filled with joy and energy and exuberance. As the ceremony proceeded through the music and dancing and speeches and everything going on, I wondered what part was planned for the exact moment of the sunrise, when the sun broke over the horizon. With the amount of planning and intentionality evident throughout the program, it had to be something special. As the light hitting the tower changed from gray through varying shades of gold, I waited to find out. And as the light strengthened, the ceremony progressed towards its central point, honoring the warriors and the veterans. Through prayer and song and recognition, veterans of the Alcatraz possession and Wounded Knee and veterans of other Native American actions were recognized and honored. This was the central reason we had gathered that day, to honor the warriors, to name their commitments and their sacrifices. It was an oddly subdued moment compared with the joy and exuberance that had preceded it. And we also gathered that day to make a statement, which had been made with the possession of Alcatraz so many years ago. In the words of one of the speakers, it was to say, we are still here. Despite everything that had been taken and all the promises that had been broken, that they were still there and their culture had not been completely taken from them. So much has been taken. The eviction from Alcatraz was just the latest in a long history of broken treaties and broken promises. There have been some 236 or more treaties made between the government of our country and the Native Americans, and not a single one has been honored. And then there are the missions, the forced schools, the massacres, the relocations. The Lenape people, who began in Delaware and Pennsylvania, faced multiple relocations over the past few hundred years, with treaty after treaty after treaty made, and more land taken. They've gone back and forth between being federally recognized to not being recognized, and back and forth again. Currently, free Lenape tribes in Oklahoma are federally recognized. Several in Canada, and a few more tribes in our area are acknowledged by the states of New Jersey and Delaware, but not by the federal government. What an awful record that we have. So where does this leave us now? Wandering and looking for meaning in this bleak field of shattered promises? Avoiding thinking about them because it feels overwhelming and makes us feel powerless to change it? While acknowledging the reality of broken promises, of all these broken vows, I believe we have the power to keep it from being bleak. And I hope we have the power to make it a different reality. The song that we just sang is based on a poem by 13th century Sufi mystic Jalal al-Din Muhammad Rumi. The original poem reads like this. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you've broken your vows 1,000 times. Come yet again. Come. We as a people have broken vows many, many times. But rather than living in a place of despair, Rumi calls on us to live in a place of welcome and of joy. Ours is not a caravan of despair. This is what I experienced at the sunrise celebration. It was not a time of despair as it could have been. It was a time of joy, a time of honor, a time of empowerment and solidarity. While the recognition of the warriors and conflicts was somber, it was surrounded by joy and energy and lifted up by them. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come even if you've broken your vows 1,000 times. But I admit that I also feel despair and powerlessness. A few years ago, I called my mother to ask her a seemingly innocuous question about my great-grandparents when they had immigrated to the United States. After hearing a charming story about how they met on the boat on the way here, they really did, I thanked my mother and I thought that was that. It wasn't, though. She got interested in ancestry research just from that conversation, and then for Christmas gave me my very own copy of the Ancestry software, complete with a subscription to Ancestry.com. student at the time, I had a couple extra minutes on my hands, so when my interest peaked, I spent the next 6 months digging into various branches of my family tree, as I've heard a number of folks here have also done after I shared another bit of my ancestry research a few months back. Really interesting stuff, especially when I found some more backstory on some folks. One of these was the Reverend Chad Brown, one of only 2 of my direct ancestors that I know of to have a Wikipedia page. He was a Baptist preacher who had come to the colonies in the 1630s from England, and he was quite the patriot. A founder of Providence, Rhode Island, wealthy, owned slaves, and he had a particular area of expertise. He was an expert in treaty negotiations, which with a little reading between the lines means he was the one who created the treaties between the settlers of Providence and the local indigenous population. Needless to say, I became more and more uneasy as I unearthed these facts. So I reached for the phone and I called the relative that I thought would be the most sympathetic to my feelings. After telling her about our common ancestor and all that I had found about him, her response was, "So what?" "So what? What do you mean, so what?" "So what? I bet nearly everybody has something like this in their ancestry. What does it matter that you happen to find out exactly what it was in ours?" I've struggled with this question ever since. And not in a theoretical sense, but in a real, lived sense. What does it matter? So I've struggled with trying to hear my own heart's answer. What difference does it make that I know this? And what difference does it make for my own life's path? My feelings start to give me an answer. The feeling that was in my heart as I learned of my ancestor and his oppression of the Native Americans in the Providence area was a feeling of dismay that made my cheeks burn. It was a feeling of shame. The shame, however, wasn't just a signal that I was presently on the caravan of despair. It was also a signal that it did matter to me. I felt a connection and a responsibility for my ancestors' actions. And my shame made sure I paid attention to it and didn't just dismiss it. In the Lenape story we heard earlier, the animals and the trapper had to do work to find a mutual understanding, to find the beads that were acceptable to trade rather than animal skins. They all came to the council and talked openly about their needs and their issues, and I'm glad they were willing to listen to one another. Later in the story, the same didn't happen between the Lenape and the Europeans. According to the story, when the Europeans came to this country, they were very big on giving a piece of paper and signing this piece of paper that was an important thing. And we, the Lenape, tried to explain to them that the paper is nothing. The beads that are made by the people whose heart and breath are beating in them are much more long-standing and much more of a contract between people. But in the story, just like the trapper and the animals before, the Lenape and the Europeans didn't understand things the same way. But the difference was that never did change. This infamous piece of paper, or many pieces of paper and treaties that were formed between the European settlers and the Native Americans, not only did harmonize with both cultures, but those are the very pieces of paper that consistently weren't honored, creating our legacy of broken vows. Brazilian educator Paulo Freire calls oppression dehumanizing. It diminishes us as human beings, and as Freire says, it acts as a distortion of the vocation of becoming more fully human. Acting against oppression is to act in a way that honors the humanity of ourselves and others, in a way that engages us in this great vocation of becoming more fully human. My feelings as I learned about my own ancestry were the result of this dehumanizing. Oppression is dehumanizing for all who are connected with it, for oppressors as well as the oppressed. Acknowledging this oppression and its impact is the first step, and acting on it is what will take us further. Rumi calls on us to first acknowledge the reality of our broken vows, but then not to stay on the caravan of despair. I hope we don't get on the caravan of indifference either. Because despite what my relative said, it does matter. It matters because it has to matter. If it doesn't, then we're forfeiting our work of becoming humans, among other humans in the world. To walk in this world means to acknowledge the humanity and needs of others, to find joy in being together. It matters to me to find out more about the impact of my ancestor and what's going on today for the people who were affected by him. And it matters because I don't want to be indifferent or silent about it. As the sun rose and bathed Alcatraz in its golden light, we honored the warriors, the veterans of Native American struggles for the recognition of their humanity and for the land that could be theirs. We honored their struggles and the difficult vocation of being human against all odds. And then, the speaker called on every single one of us present, both those of Native American descent and allies. She called on us to find ways to be warriors. Being a warrior, she said, is to stand up for the right thing. Being a warrior is not to ride on the caravan of despair. It is to see the despair and then to act. And in that action, one finds the grace and the joy that can heal despair. This is what we're called on to do as human beings, to take action, to be warriors. Now, this is stronger than we usually talk about here, this being warriors, but I want to challenge each of us to explore ways that we can be warriors for what is needed and what's right in the world. If our vision for the future is bright and strong, then we have to be equally passionate about our work so that we can get there and build the world that we wish to see. May it be so.